The rain pelted down in heavy sheets, a relentless downpour that blurred the windshield of Daniel Harper's luxury SUV as he sat motionless at a red light, his fingers drumming impatiently against the steering wheel, unaware that life, as he knew it, was about to be rewritten by a ghost from his past. Daniel, a man once adored by his small-town community, now lived a life of sharp suits and shallow accolades. A self-made entrepreneur with a cold glint in his eye and a heart hardened by pride. Whose success had come at the price of compassion, kindness, and, most notably, his marriage to Alina, a woman who once saw the man inside him before the world did, who had held his hand when his startup was a dream and their apartment was barely warm enough in winter. 6 years ago, in the middle of a cruel December evening, Daniel had told Alina to leave, accusing her of being a burden, blaming her for his failures, for the child they lost, and for the haunting silence that had crept into their marriage, not realizing that the silence was not hers, but his own creation, born from his growing obsession with success and image, not love. She had left quietly, without screaming or begging, just with a single suitcase and a dignity he would not recognize until much later, walking out of their home with swollen eyes, a broken heart, and something else, something he never knew. In the years that followed, Daniel flourished publicly, cutting ribbons, building a company that would redefine digital marketing in the Midwest, hailed as a visionary and mentor, while Alina disappeared into a quiet corner of life, into a modest neighborhood miles away, living not in bitterness but in resilience, raising not one child, but two, twins, a boy and a girl, conceived just before that final fight, children Daniel never knew existed, whom Alina chose to raise away from the shadow of a man who had once raised his voice at her louder than his love, believing that love should never have to beg for its place at the table. She worked 2 jobs, first as a receptionist and then as a baker in a local cafe, kneading dough before dawn and reading bedtime stories at night, learning to balance motherhood with scraped knees, forgotten homework, and whispered prayers that her children would never grow up thinking they were unwanted. The twins, Liam and Liana, grew up without bitterness, for Alina taught them to forgive without pretending the hurt never happened, to see people for who they are and not just who they used to be, and to always hold on to their worth, even if someone once tried to make them feel small. For years, they lived a life of simplicity but rich in laughter and storytelling, unaware that their father was now a name on billboards and magazine covers, until the day Alina saw Daniel's face on a screen in the bakery's break room, announcing the launch of a new initiative focused on family-first branding and authentic connection. Words that made her heart tighten with irony and, surprisingly, compassion. She didn't hate him, she had healed too deeply for that, but she did wonder if he had ever changed, or if he still believed success could excuse cruelty. She hadn't intended to return, not until Liam fell sick with a condition that required specialized care, treatment they couldn't afford, even with her long shifts and insurance stretched thin. And though it broke her pride, she knew what she had to do, not for her, but for her children. When she arrived at Daniel's corporate headquarters 6 years later, wearing a simple coat and holding both twins by the hand, the receptionist nearly dismissed her until Alina calmly said, "Tell him Alina Harper is here. He'll know." And when Daniel stepped out of the glass elevator, dressed in a $1,000 suit, he froze, his past standing before him with 2 pairs of eyes that looked too much like his own. He stumbled through pleasantries, confusion masking guilt, as Alina introduced the twins, her voice steady but soft. "These are your children, Daniel. They're 6. And they're your legacy, not your mistake." The silence that followed cracked through the marble floors of his empire, not because she wanted revenge, but because truth, when spoken with grace, has a way of bringing giants to their knees. Daniel didn't shout or deny, he simply stared, the weight of 6 years collapsing in his chest, realizing in that moment that the success he had built meant nothing in the eyes of the 2 children who didn't even know him, and in the heart of the woman he had once discarded. They spoke in private, Alina sharing their story not with resentment, but with clarity, showing him pictures, medical reports, school drawings, and dreams deferred, not to make him feel guilty, but to give him the chance to do something right for once, to know what it meant to show up, even if late. Daniel wept, for the first time in years, not for himself, but for the memories he never made, the birthdays he missed, the first words he didn't hear, and the daughter who looked at him like he was a stranger. He offered money, of course, but Alina shook her head, saying, "They don't need a check, Daniel. They need a father." if you can be one, truly, without lies, without excuses, and in that moment, something inside him broke, not out of shame, but awakening, the realization that true legacy is not built in boardrooms, but in bedtime hugs, shared stories, and the courage to ask for forgiveness. In the weeks that followed, Daniel made no grand gestures, no press conferences, no public donations, but he showed up quietly at school plays, attended doctor's appointments, learned how to braid lianas hair from YouTube, and took Liam to his first science fair, fumbling awkwardly through it all but never giving up, because for the first time, he was building something real, something fragile yet true, and slowly, the twins began to trust him. Not because he was perfect, but because he was present. He learned that kindness isn't about what you give, but how you listen, how you apologize, and how you choose to change. Alina didn't move back in, and she didn't need to. This wasn't a story of rekindled romance, but of redemption, of a man who had lost everything he didn't even know he had, and a woman who chose to forgive not because he deserved it, but because her children did. Over time, the community that once hailed Daniel as a business genius began to see a new side of him, not in headlines, but in the little things, like the way he volunteered at the local shelter his company once ignored, or how he mentored young fathers at a church support group, not as a CEO, but as a man learning how to heal. And years later, when Liam and Liana stood on stage to receive scholarships for their outstanding compassion and leadership, they thanked their mother for her strength and their father for becoming someone they were proud of. Not the man who kicked their mother out, but the one who came back and stayed, not with flowers or apologies, but with changed behavior. The story of Daniel and Alina became something the town whispered about, not as gossip, but as a quiet testimony of how love can return not as romance, but as responsibility, how forgiveness isn't forgetting but choosing not to let bitterness win, and how sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones we plan, but the ones that grow from broken places we finally dare to repair. And as Daniel watched his children walk forward into a future they built with courage, he understood something he never learned in business school, that the true measure of a man is not in how high he climbs, but in how deeply he loves, and how humbly he returns to the people he once hurt, choosing, every day, to be better than the man he used to be.